I want to start today's video with the video of the front lines of the Russian war in Ukraine, in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine. In this clip we can see a Russian soldier driving along the so-called Road of Life near the embattled city of Pokrovsk. We can see a huge number of tanks and armored personnel vehicles that were destroyed by Ukrainian drones. The Russian soldier rides a motorcycle very fast, trying to penetrate Ukrainian defenses and avoid the drones. But at the end of the video, we hear the soldier saying that he was wounded. The international press is full of articles and publications that are discussing and speculating what Trump will do after his inauguration on January 20th. President Trump and his team announced that they want to talk about the desire to seize Greenland and the Panama Canal, and also annex Canada. For example, in the Russian press everyone admires Trump and highly praises his intentions to annex Canada and Greenland, and Trump is being compared with Putin's strong actions when he seized Crimea in 2014. Some journalists say that Trump may try to buy Cuba, the Bahamas, Taiwan and North Korea. It may sound like a joke, but let's think about it logically. Maybe Donald Trump shouldn't have started with Greenland because Greenland is part of Denmark and it is still a close ally of the United States. Maybe Donald Trump should start with Cuba. Cuba is geographically very close to the US. It is literally 80 miles from the Florida coast by sea. Now in Cuba, China has a serious presence. It is in charge of upgrading main infrastructure and financial investments to the government and has enormous influence there. China also has a decisive political and economic influence in Venezuela. Therefore, such a huge presence of China in Cuba is a geopolitical threat to the United States. So maybe Donald Trump should start with Cuba? Political leadership changes in the air for Cuba, because Cuban Communist Party leader Raul Castro is 93 years old. Other representatives of the Communist Political Bureau Committee that rule the country, Jose Machado, is 94 years old. Ramir Valdez is 92 years old. In Cuba, during the severe economic crisis, people try to flee to Venezuela, and then after they arrive in Venezuela, they try to get to the United States through the southern border. People in Cuba have to deal with food rations, and oftentimes there is no electricity for hours. In many states, but especially in Florida, there is a huge immigrant community from Cuba. Cuban Americans occupy high places in local and state governments. Even in Washington, D.C., in the federal government, you can find Cuban Americans. For example, the future Secretary of State Marco Rubio is a Cuban American, and there are other representatives of the Cuban lobby who could support Donald Trump's decision. Maybe they can enforce political or economical influence on Cuba to such an extent that the communist regime there changes to a more friendly one. For the first time, the Ukrainian armed forces were able to capture 2 North Korean prisoners of war alive. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky confirmed this on his social media and published their photos. They have already been transported to Kyiv, and Ukrainian military intelligence officers are having conversations with them. The North Koreans were on Russian territory, not on the territory of occupied Ukraine. They fought in the Kursk region, where the Ukrainian armed forces captured and still held a small area last summer. The North Korean military had Russian passports showing that they were citizens of Russia, but these 2 people could not speak a word of Russian or English. The North Koreans reported heavy losses in their battalion and severe lack of supplies. The capture of these 2 North Korean prisoners of war is unconditional proof of North Korea's participation in the war against Ukraine. This was a unique operation. The Ukrainian military on the front line repeatedly stated on their social media that the North Koreans would not surrender. If they see that they are surrounded or outnumbered, they usually blow up grenades and unalive themselves. North Koreans also do not surrender because their relatives remaining in North Korea will be placed in concentration camps and could be unalived. The South Korean National Intelligence Service also confirmed to Ukrainian sources that Ukraine had captured 2 wounded North Korean soldiers. The total number of North Korean military personnel in Ukraine was about 12,000 people as of December. Ukrainian drones struck an oil refinery in Engels, a Russian town in Saratov region, and it caused a massive fire that still continues for 5 days now. A state of emergency has been declared in the area, and firefighters' efforts have been unsuccessful. This oil depot has been supplying fuel to the 2 military airfields which are home to Russian strategic military aviation. The German far-right party, called an Alternative for Germany, is the largest right-wing radical party that currently ranks second in popularity polls. This party is supported by approximately 20% of Germans and is only second to the Christian Democratic Union Party of Germany, for which 30% of the German population votes. The leader of the Alternative for Germany, Alice Weidel, held a live stream with the world's richest businessman, Elon Musk, on his social media platform X. During that stream, she called Adolf Hitler a communist. And she also does not hide her sympathy and support for Russian President Vladimir Putin. After this stream, many German public organizations, trade unions and universities protested Alice Weidel and her statement and said that they would close their accounts and leave Twitter or X. In the north of the Gaza Strip, a small column of Israeli troops was attacked by an improvised explosive device planted by Hamas. 4 people were killed and 6 were injured. This kind of guerrilla warfare between Hamas militants and the Israeli army could continue for many years. The administration of outgoing US President Joseph Biden has imposed new sanctions against 183 vessels of the Russian Shadow Fleet that transport oil bypassing the US and European sanctions. The largest Russian oil companies were also sanctioned. These are the most significant sanctions that have been imposed against the Russian oil sector in history. The purpose of these sanctions is to curb the growth of Russia's oil revenues and reduce funding for the Russian war machine. And for the first time in 3 years of Russia's military invasion of Ukraine, China banned the entry of Russian oil tankers to their ports. Now the Russian vessels of the Shadow Fleet will have to drift in international waters until they find a buyer at a deep discount.